Here's Ian Patrick, going to give us a little bit of an update. Hey, Ian.
Hey, Dan. So we have a couple of things that we're going to talk about today. First of all, we're going to look over into Israel because they've been making some headlines recently. Obviously, they have just made their new coalition government. The leaders of the new government, Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid, are awaiting an approval vote, which now has a date to it. The approval vote is going to take place on June 13th, 2021. And if this coalition government is approved, then Israel will have a government and they won't have to do another election like they've had to do for the past couple of years.
And they'll have a new prime minister.
That is correct. Yeah, well, technically two new prime ministers. As part of the deal, they're going to be sharing, Naftali Bennett and Yair Lapid are going to be sharing the prime ministership. I think after a couple of years, Bennett will serve first and then he'll hand it off to Lapid, who will serve the remainder of the couple of years. In response to this, the current prime minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, who would obviously be ousted from under the new government, reacted to this news by telling members of his political party that they have seen, quote, the greatest election fraud in the history of the country. He also added that it may be the greatest election fraud in the history of democracy as well. He also accused Bennett of compromising with leftist political parties, which is partly true, actually. Part of the coalition government that they had to form, that Bennett and Lapid had to form, was that they took together a lot of right and centrist political parties, and then they had to tack on one or two, I believe, smaller leftist political parties. So there is some truth in that sentence, that they had to somewhat compromise in order to form this government. However, as reports still say, it is still a very slim majority for this new government, which means, you know, as long as everybody stays in the coalition government that approves the coalition government, then it will be approved and Israel will have a government. If any one of those members that are currently forming this small coalition government defect in any way, then the government will fall apart and they'll have to try again. So there is some truth in what Netanyahu's saying there. By the way, just some interesting fact, Netanyahu has served for 12 years as prime minister, sort of intermittently. He served, I believe, in the 90s and then came back again in the late 2000s. And he's the nation's longest serving prime minister as well for Israel. So we're keeping up with that, making sure everything's up to date. Obviously, this is very big news, so we're going to keep following what happens. And we'll see how... I should say, too, a lot of people are already criticizing some of the new leaders for the coalition government because they don't see, at least for one of the leaders, they don't see much of a change between Netanyahu and I believe it's Bennett, who is also a more right-leaning politician. So they don't see much of a change, and they don't certainly, and by they I mean certain outlets don't like the change. But, well, you know, we'll keep following and see what goes on with that.
Yeah, great.
In other news, Vice President Kamala Harris visited Guatemala on Monday, as Sam said the other day. She also visited Mexico yesterday. She spoke with both countries' presidents about a number of issues, including immigration. In both countries, Vice President Harris said that each president must take the initiative in decreasing poverty, violence, and corruption. And she indicated a large reason is for immigration to the U.S. southern borders due to the fact that citizens in Central and South America are faced with just crazy challenges as part of their everyday lives. And she kind of placed it on these presidents to fix those challenges. In other news, in an interview on Tuesday with Lester Holt for NBC News, Harris actually laughed when Holt asked her why she hasn't been to the southern border. Although she has been visiting Guatemala and Mexico, she still has not made a trip to the southern border. In this interview, she said, "We have been to the border, we have been to the border, we have been to the border." Holt actually told her, "But you haven't been to the border." And then Harris laughed and said, "Well, I haven't been to Europe either." So, she maintains that she will go to the border eventually, but she's doing the Biden administration's addressing the root cause of migration sort of push by visiting Guatemala and these other nations.
Interesting to note that the Guatemalan president and the Mexican president both criticized the Biden administration before she even got there. They were highly critical of the Biden administration for their policies and what they've done to both countries. So I thought that was interesting. Yeah.
Go to FISM.TV/news for more.